Imagine a facility serving the world's most powerful and heavily funded military, a place producing and housing enough radioactive material to comprehensively destroy the world. A plant constructed for that exact purpose, which has been doing so since 1943, and supplied the isotope uranium-235 for the bomb which destroyed Hiroshima. This site has anti-air defences capable of destroying intruding aircraft, the same armoured cars used by a national agency and military, and guards authorised to kill, patrolling amongst multiple fences and 3 rows of dragon's teeth vehicle blockades. This is the Y-12 National Security Complex in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, home of the atomic bomb which wasn't publicly accessible until 1959. And this wasn't the nuclear facility, but the whole town. Oak Ridge was comparable to closed Soviet cities like Ozyorsk, such was the secrecy around this place. Naturally, it was considered perfect for the $500 million highly enriched uranium materials facility, a high-security bank vault for 400,000 kilograms of weaponized uranium. For perspective, Little Boy, the bomb which destroyed Hiroshima, had 63 kilograms of weaponized uranium on board, and during the detonation, only 1% of the material was consumed by the fission reaction, less than 1 kilogram. The remaining 62 kilograms were blown away by the might of the explosion. It's not surprising then the measures taken to protect the Y-12 facility, so now imagine bypassing all that security at the modest age of 82. Well, that's what Plowshares activist and nun Megan Rice did in 2012. Accompanying her was Gregory Boertje-Obed and Michael Walli, aged 57 and 63 respectively. So why and how, on the 28th of July, in spite of the life-threatening defences, did the 3 enter the facility? They did it with help from anonymous Plowshares members, with meticulous planning, with courage, and with faith. It's not hard to imagine why terrorists would infiltrate such a place, but the activists did this to protest Y-12's role in threatening world peace. Since the 1960s, when the Cold War was hottest, members of the Plowshares movement, a group of Christian activists, have advocated for resistance to war, and since 1980 they've participated in similar activities to the one at Y-12. Then, 8 Plowshares members entered a General Electric plant where Minuteman III missiles were made. But despite opposing war on all that the missiles stood for, they didn't destroy them, but hammered the nose cones, poured their blood symbolizing life on documentation, and prayed. Just over 30 years later, faced by more sophisticated security systems protecting an even deadlier arsenal, bankrolled by a much bigger purse, Plowshares members did so again. Perpetrators of the covert act, Rice, Boertje-Obed, and Walli approached Y-12 under the cover of darkness. For secrecy and security, the facility was constructed in a secluded valley. That meant there was an overlooking ridge, an ideal point of entry for the Plowshares activists. However, in some ways, it wasn't convenient. It was steep, and to avoid being spotted, only a torchlight guided the 3 as they hiked through the trees. They started off at the Scarborough Church of Christ around 2:30 in the morning, and wanted to reach the facility by sunrise. Their first challenge came during Pine Ridge's ascent. The Y-12 facility covers over 150 square kilometers, and they had encountered a chain-link fence boasting a no trespassing sign. Boertje-Obed cut through with a pair of bolt cutters, and once the 3 were through, they rejoined the fence with string to conceal their intrusion. It was at least 3:30 by the time they reached the ridge's peak. Led by Boertje-Obed, they headed down Pine Ridge towards the facility. With the facility illuminating the buildings and path, they no longer needed their torch. The desire of the Plowshares members to reach the white, turreted building on the north side of the compound dictated their commitment to stealth. Between them and this structure were patrols they hid from in grass, cameras they escaped, barriers they stepped over, and fences. Meeting their next fence, the facility had 4, they again cut through. This time, they lay a banner reading "Never Again" with a picture of a nuclear weapon across the broken boundary. At such a secure facility, one might expect to hear sirens blaring at this point. That was what the 3 were thinking approaching the 3rd fence, this time threaded with cable. Yet, as they cut it and moved forward, there were still no alarms. A combination of their faith and their miraculous progress made the 3 feel like the Holy Spirit was with them as they cut the final fence. Some scouting and preparation, bolt cutters, and a just cause was all it took to infiltrate what should have been one of the most secure places on Earth. Between them and the highly enriched uranium materials facility, 12 meters of nothing. The hike must have seemed like the hardest part of their journey. They covered the daunting walls of the target structure, sentry by automatic machine guns, with blood and spray paint. The blood belonged to deceased Plowshares member Tom Lewis, who had burnt draft papers for the Vietnam War in 1968. Their slogans read, "Work for peace, not war. The fruit of justice is peace. Woe to the empire of blood. And Plowshares please Isaiah. Isaiah was a prophet. Hammer their swords into plowshares," he said, meaning to convert weapons into peaceful tools. This is where the Plowshares movement's name comes from. With a small hammer, they took off a 30-centimeter chunk of the building and wrapped crime scene tape around it. They decorated the ground with Bibles and white roses, honouring the German White Rose student group which opposed Hitler during the Second World War. When a patrol car appeared at 5 a.m., over 2 hours after they'd entered the compound, they began to sing. The guard recognized the three were protesters rather than terrorists. As he called for assistance, confirming an intrusion suggested by a triggered alarm, the activists offered bread and claimed God had sent them. The guard told them not to act rashly or remove anything from their backpacks. Rice told him she had a heart condition. The backup ordered the Plowshares activists to the floor at gunpoint. He also asked the first guard, who remained calm, to grab his M4 assault rifle, don body armor, and provide cover, for he feared there was a sniper lurking up the nearby ridge. Until the intruders were taken away 5 hours later, over 8 hours after they left the church, they sat cuffed on the floor. Although the Plowshares activists embarked on this venture to bring light to a serious issue and encourage change, inspired by the Bible's teachings, federal prosecutors were appalled and sought to throw the book at them. Albeit for different reasons, both sides claimed it was a matter of national security. For the prosecution, however, that meant the initial trespassing charge wasn't enough. Awaiting trial, Rice and Walli pleaded not guilty and were released, while Boertje-Obed said, "I plead justified because the building of nuclear weapons is a war crime." He was sent to jail. By the time he was going through the process of leaving prison and preparing a defense, the court handed the Plowshares members another 2 charges, this time felonies much more serious than the misdemeanor of trespassing. These related to destruction of property and depredating property belonging to government departments. While trespassing only carried a prison sentence of 1 year, the felonies meant the 3 were facing 15 years in prison. While the 3 had all served time behind bars for previous protest acts, they were approaching ages where a 15-year sentence could be the rest of their lives. The United States wasn't finished either. The prosecutors threatened to file a sabotage charge, carrying a sentence of 20 years. To support this charge at the trial, the prosecutor said their whole purpose was to interfere with or obstruct Y-12 operations. As if to emphasize this was an attack on the United States, they asked if the Plowshares members had partook in similar acts abroad. "It's pretty pricey going to Russia or North Korea," said Michael Walli. And when the prosecutor compared their break-in to the attacks on 9/11, he said, "Does that mean 9/11 was a good thing?" referencing how both incidents had led to tighter security. The 3 were upfronted admitting they had broken in. The government claimed the cost of repairs to the facility was $70,000, a figure the judge said was exacerbated by a magnitude of 10. The defendants said it was a crime to prevent a greater crime, known as a necessity defense. Yet, despite the case being put before a jury, they were convicted on all counts. Sister Megan Rice said, "I regret I didn't do this 70 years ago." On the 9th of May 2013, she and the others were sentenced to 35 years in jail, and being deemed violent offenders, couldn't remain on the outside while they appealed. At the hearing, the judge, who felt regret at putting good people behind bars, gave Megan Rice 3 years, and Michael Walli and Gregory Boertje-Obed 5. It wasn't anything near what the prosecution argued was just, yet to some it might appear extensive for 3 people essentially trying to prevent omnicide, meaning the self-induced destruction of humankind. On the 8th of May 2015, almost 3 years after the protest at Y-12, the sabotage charge was dropped. A week later, on the 16th, having spent 2 years in prison, they were released but ordered to pay $52,953 for the repairs. This figure included the cost of painters at $100 an hour each, dog handlers at $500 an hour, and $7,000 for documentation of the damages. Y-12's management also bought 450 litres of paint to cover up the slogans. For 3 devout followers of God who felt blessed that a lack of commitments to work or family allowed them to bring attention to this issue, the fine was unrealistic. They knew where the money would go, and thus had no intention to pay, let alone the means to do so. The 3 continued to campaign for nuclear disarmament. For 2012, when the protest at Y-12 took place, the National Nuclear Security Administration's requested budget was $11.7 billion. For 2020, it's $16.9 billion. Since 2012, Y-12 has changed management. The old management's contract was terminated, and new security measures have been implemented. Perhaps then, the price paid by Megan Rice, Gregory Boertje-Obed, and Michael Walli was invaluable. They sacrificed their liberty and time in the hopes the world could be a safer place. In that respect, it's not the age of the Plowshares members which should attract attention to their cause, but the bravery and selflessness they exhibited. Those embarrassed by the events called them criminals, but there are worse people than these 3 to have breaking into a nuclear facility. If Boertje-Obed could scope out the facility on Google Earth and gather notes on surveillance from a prior visit to Oak Ridge, what's to say someone with malicious intent couldn't do the same? Would terrorists send a team of 3 with a combined age of 202 or armed combatants? One could argue he and the others were experienced in activities like this, but couldn't the same also be said of a terrorist organisation? The 3 who have lived simple lives couldn't pay the fines levied against them by the judges and prosecution, but it was a wealth of faith rather than money which helped them enter the facility. Yet when it comes to nuclear weapons, the reality is there's never a victor. As the security budget has increased, so has the United States' expenditure on their nuclear arsenal. Maintaining outdated weapons, developing new ones, gambling to stay one step ahead in a game the spectators never want played. As long as nuclear weapons exist, there remains a need to safeguard them. Unfortunately, it's not until something goes wrong that we learn just how close we are to catastrophe, and how distant the safety measures are from what they should be.